Good morning. I would like to welcome all of you who've dialed into our investor call with the management of PharmaMar. My name is Kane Akai. I'm a senior healthcare analyst here at Chardan. And as call participants are familiar, our focus at Chardan is on identifying companies that can generate exceptionally high long-term investment returns by creating shared value for society through disruptive innovation. Joining me on this leadership call this morning from PharmaMar are Pascal Besman, Vice President, Strategic Development, and Jose Luis Moreno, Vice President, Director of Capital Markets and IR. Before we get started, just some compliance issues. During this call, we will not be discussing any Chardan research. Any discussion about research should be coordinated between a participant and their respective salesperson at Chardan. A recording of this call will be made available to clients afterwards. By participating in this call, our speakers attest that they have made Chardan aware of any potential conflicts, and they will not discuss any material, non-public, or confidential information that they are aware of that may breach their legal, regulatory, or fiduciary responsibilities to any parties. With that out of the way, for anyone in our audience who'd like to submit a question to ask of our speakers, please email it to me at knakae@chardan.com, and time permitting, I'll try to ask it during the call. So let's go ahead and get started. Jose, or Pepe, as we know you, and Pascal, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today. And maybe to start, Pepe, could you spend a couple of minutes to provide a brief overview of PharmaMar for our investors who are new to the story?
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, thank you for inviting and for organizing this webinar. And yeah, about PharmaMar, we are an oncology company. We are an oncology company developing marine-derived oncology drugs. So we have our own discovery platform, so we can keep feeding our pipeline with new molecules. And out of the biotech companies, we're one of those biotechs who already have revenues. So we are a biotech with revenues. We have two compounds generating revenues. First one called Yondelis, who sells in about 80 countries, approved for soft tissue sarcoma and ovarian cancer. And our most recent drugs called Zepzelca. And Zepzelca was approved for small cell lung cancer first in US back in 2020. And for the company, it's been a game changer. So it's been transformative for the company because two reasons. First, because it was approved in the US and what it meant in terms of revenues. And it became the standard of treatment in about a year since launch, or in less than a year. And second, because of the agreement we signed with Jazz Pharmaceuticals for the US and Canada. We have our own sales force in Europe where we distribute ourselves, our drugs, and elsewhere out of Europe, we signed license agreements like the one we did with Jazz for Zepzelca, or the one we have with Janssen for Yondelis in the US. So we have about 19 different partners. We listed in the Madrid Stock Exchange. We have a market cap of around 600 million. And as I said, we're one of those companies who have revenues, and not only revenues, we're a profitable company. Then, as I said, we had it was transformative in 2020 with the approval of Zepzelca in the US, and now we're very excited about the coming months, hopefully, when I have data about some of the trials that we'll see now, that it could drive us to approval in Europe, which is one of the most important milestones in the short future, to get Zepzelca also approved in Europe and be sold through our sales force. That, again, could be another very important transformative news for the company. This is very, very shortly, in 2 minutes, as you said, probably slightly more, with little equity story about the company. And now we can talk more about the news flow and how important this news flow is for us.
Yeah, great. Well, I guess, just before we kind of get to that part, you did mention, one of your two current revenue-generating drugs is Yondelis, which has been a very successful drug for you. But, like a lot of other drugs, it eventually begins to see generic competition and for you folks, it's started to occur in late 2022. So, do you feel like where the sales are now that they'll stabilize, or how should we think about the go forward path for Yondelis sales?
Yeah. And that has been a story of success because it was launched in 2007, and we only got the generics last quarter of 2022. So full year was last year. For us, it's generated lots of revenues, and it's within the product life cycle. We had the generics full year generics last year. The biggest impact I think we've seen it. Last year, revenues of Yondelis were about 60% of the previous year. So, all in all, we think we've seen most of it. It's going to, I guess, stabilize or slightly decline single digits in the next few years. Yondelis is done what I had to do for the company. We were ready for it. One of the things is important to highlight is that we anticipated these, and despite it, we announced it to the market ahead of time, but we also had the cash and solid balance sheet to navigate through these years of the generics. So, until we get further approvals and new countries where Zepzelca is going to be approved and increase our sales.
Okay, well, great. Well, let's focus most of our time here on the prospects for lurbinectedin, also known commercially as Zepzelca. It is approved in the U.S. and several other countries as a treatment for small cell lung cancer. I think most folks appreciate that small cell is less prevalent than non-small cell, but certainly is much more aggressive. So Pascal, can you describe the etiology of small cell lung cancer, how it's different from non-small cell lung?
Yeah, sure, Kay, and thank you to Chardan also on my behalf. Small cell lung cancer, as you said, is a very aggressive lung cancer. It's a very aggressive cancer. In fact, it's one of the 3 recalcitrant cancers that the U.S. government has identified as being beneficiaries of NIH money, one of the 3. Small cell lung cancer is about 15% of all lung cancers and is almost ubiquitously caused by tobacco use, often many decades previously. So people who smoked in the 80s and gave up get this now and say, my gosh, I've given up smoking 40 years ago. The differences you asked me about this compared to non-small cell, first of all, the numbers are much different. About 30,000 Americans get this a year, 15% of lung, about double that in Europe, because firstly, the population is double the size of the United States, and secondly, the rate of smoking is higher. A very poor prognosis, with the median overall survival from diagnosis being 1 year, which is very different than what we see in non-small cell. And of course, this begs the question of why, and why are there so many targeted drugs dividing the non-small cell pizza pie into ever smaller pieces of the pie, but small cell seems to progress at this glacial pace. And the answer is that in non-small cell lung cancer, you have driver mutations that are targetable by either targeting the receptor with an inhibitor or by mopping up all the ligands with another inhibitor. And so these are the ways that we've gone down the targeted route in non-small cell. But in small cell, the mutations are all in tumor suppressor genes, RB1, P10, P53. And so targeting these is like trying to turn off an off switch. And that's why the progress has been really very, very slow. Lurbinectedin, or Zepzelca, mechanistically is an inhibitor of activated transcription. What does that mean in plain English? Well, cancer is a disease of cellular division out of control. Cells divide when they receive a signal to divide. Happens to your hair all day long, your fingernails, your GI tract is sloughing all the time. These signals in small cell lung cancer are the real driver of this, and inhibiting this transcription in small cell is the poster child for transcription. So a transcription inhibitor is no shock that it works.
Well, great. So Zepzelca was granted accelerated approval by the FDA in 2020 based on positive data from the phase 2 basket trial, in which it was evaluated as monotherapy, and it has emerged as the preferred second-line treatment for small cell lung. To help explain that, can you describe first-line therapy for small cell lung and how failing that informs the choices for second line?
Sure. As of 2019, there was a change in the landscape of treating first-line small cell lung cancer. Previously, treatment was platinum etoposide or a platinum doublet, standard chemotherapy. This is an interesting disease insofar as almost all patients respond immediately to their first-line treatment. Unfortunately, they quickly progress, and when they progress, the disease is more aggressive. Since 2019, a drug called atezolizumab or Tecentriq got approved in the first-line setting, and that first-line setting transduces through diagnosis, the first-line setting, and the maintenance setting. Let me describe what that means. First-line setting is as you are diagnosed, and these patients get platinum and etoposide for 4 cycles and only 4 because they're too toxic beyond that, combined with atezolizumab. After the 4 cycles of platinum etoposide drop off, they continue with the atezolizumab in the maintenance setting until progression. That added about 2 months of overall survival, and subsequently to that, durvalumab or Imfinzi received the exact same approval with very similar data. So all patients in the United States and most in Europe are getting platinum etoposide plus IO, immuno-oncology continuing after the 4 cycles.
So when somebody fails, why is it that your drug has emerged as the preferred second-line treatment? I mean, obviously, when it was first granted approval, it was really the first drug in decades since topotecan to achieve that. But maybe talk about more of the dynamics for second line.
So before we got approved, only about 60% of patients got treated in second line. So the remaining 40%, which we can't really quantify exactly, but they fall into 4 buckets. One, those who unfortunately pass away during frontline or maintenance therapy. The second group, those who progress and go to hospice. The third group who had topotecan presented to them as their alternative and said, I'm good, leave me alone. And the fourth group who just maybe did something alternative like acupuncture. Those latter 3 groups, hospice, no thank you, and alternative, are really functions of the value proposition to the doctor and the patient and the caregiver of topotecan. Topotecan was a monopoly with an under 20% market share, which is quite remarkable, a monopoly. And the reason for that is threefold. It's barely efficacious, it's highly toxic, and it's very cumbersome. And so when we launched, we had a big advantage over them insofar as our data looks a lot better. Our adverse event profile is significantly better. And our administration profile is much more convenient, especially as we launched, or Jazz launched, during the eye of the hurricane of COVID, July of 2020. Our drug is administered in a 1-hour infusion once every 3 weeks, whereas topotecan is infused every day, 5 days out of 7. So you can imagine how enthusiastic a patient would not be to go to a COVID-infested clinic during COVID to get a drug that's barely efficacious and causes a lot of adverse events. So that's how we've become treatment of choice today.
And you touched on the fact that Jazz is your exclusive licensee for marketing the drug in the U.S. Can you talk about, how, some of the key aspects of that arrangement, and just generally how is the partnership going?
Partnership is going, very, very well. We're very happy with it, and key arrangement of the agreement. You remember from our announcement when we when we announced the agreement, the total value of the agreement is over $1 billion. So with 200 million upfront, 100 million was the first milestone when the drug was approved in June 2020. And there's total of 550 million in commercial milestones and about 150 in regulatory milestones. And then royalties range from high teens to 30%. So those are the terms of the general terms of the agreement. And so far is going very well, as Pascal said. They did a very successful launch in the middle of the pandemic. I mean, the launch was in July 2020. He was also mentioned it became the standard of treatment in second line in about less than a year. And it's shown, continuous growth. Last year it was growing 23. All the figures that just reported, it was a 7% increase year on year. We just saw the early May, just presented the results, and they show a 12% increase quarter on quarter, with a quarter which I believe this first quarter of this year has been record quarter in terms of sales, about 75 million is what they reported. It's been record sales ever since launch, so it's continuously growing. So and gaining market share, I guess. So we're very happy.
And what do you think the prospects are for further market penetration by Zepzelca in the U.S.?
I guess this question would be more appropriate for Josh, who's the one who is the strategy and commercial strategy and working on the field. From our side, of course, we expect this to carry on growing on second line, and I guess that the big increase in sales will happen if we ever get approved in first line maintenance, because there are more patients and in better state, so probably will be treated during more cycles. So I guess that the big jump in sales eventually will happen if they get approved in first line maintenance.
Okay. So, Pascal, one of the things you touched on earlier in talking about the causes of the disease is the tight correlation with smoking, and that still being more prevalent in Europe. Your ongoing phase 3 Lagoon trial is designed to secure EMA approval and full FDA approval. But a few years back, it was hoped that the phase 3 Atlantis study could serve this purpose, but that study failed. So can you tell us what happened there, what you learned from that study, and how that maybe informed the design of the Lagoon study?
Sure. So as you say, the Lagoon study now is designed to serve to confirm our accelerated approval with FDA, and if successful, can lead to a registrational filing with EMA and other regulatory agencies that required a randomized trial. In thinking about what we learned from the Atlantis trial that you mentioned, or what the changes are in this trial, there are mainly three. The first one I'll describe isn't so much something that we decided to do based on learning, but rather something FDA requested and mandated, which is that 70% of the patients are to have had prior immuno-oncology and frontline treatment. That makes sense because that's the standard of care in the United States. Why do I say that this is a good thing for us? We have got 4 public pieces of data so far that confirm our original preclinical hypothesis that LIRB and IO synergize and are additive. I'll describe them to you now in a second. There's no such data for topotecan. There's no such data for irinotecan, the control arms. The 4 pieces of data are as follows. In our basket trial that got us approved, there were 8 of the 105 patients who had prior IO. 8. 5 of them got atezo, 3 of them got nivo. 6 of these 8 patients did as well in second-line LIRB as they did with frontline IO. That is not something you see in cancer, of course, because once a patient starts to progress, they tend to progress faster. So to see a better response in second line than first line is very much an eyebrow raise. In fact, even more surprising, Kay, 2 of these patients went from having progressive disease in frontline to having a partial response in second line. That's almost unheard of. And as I learned from my parents, when something sounds too good to be true, it usually is. And the reason I say that, slightly comically, is because IO, you know well, Kay, has got a very long half-life. And so the second line treatment of Lurbi was not really Lurbi monotherapy. It was Lurbi with the decaying IO. So that's a little bit of a tweak. We further presented at a congress in 2021, SITC, 26 patients, pure second line, meaning no prior IO, atezolizumab plus lurbinectedin. We got approved on a 35% response rate in second line. Atezolizumab had a response rate of single digits. The combination read out an ORR of over 60%. Something's going on. That data was repeated and presented at ESMO last year with pembrolizumab or Keytruda. Again, the sum of the parts being greater than the individual. And lastly, in the Atlantis trial you mentioned, Kay, there were about 40 patients who had prior IO. And those that got lurbinectedin as opposed to the control had a PFS that was 50% greater. So the fact that we have got IO in prior patients in Lagoon is a major win in our sail and is a real reason for our in-house enthusiasm for its success. The second change is that the worst subset in Atlantis, and it was not a huge surprise, was the patients with brain mets. Why is it not a huge surprise? Number one, brain mets is bad. So you expect it to be a bad prognosis. Number two, lurbinectedin is a large, small molecule that does not cross an intact blood-brain barrier. But it was really surprising to see the hazard ratio be as bad as it was. It was 1.3. And upon further review, as they say in the NFL, it seems that a lot of the patients who we asked the physician before entering into the trial if their brain mets were stable, and the doctor said yes, they were not stable. Doctors sometimes exaggerate a little with all good intentions to get their patients into clinical trials. And so this time we're requiring a second confirmatory scan before accrual into the trial to reduce this negative hazard ratio. And thirdly, also very importantly, this is the first time FDA has allowed oral topotecan to be used in the control arm. Oral topotecan was approved in a non-inferior statistical way, but it is numerically inferior. But the fact is that IV topotecan, due to its severe adverse events, introduces patient selection bias. If a physician has a 92-year-old woman who weighs 40 kilos waddling in with her walker and her COPD as well, you're not putting that lady into a trial of a 50% chance of IV topotecan. It's not a reasonable option. And so this trial design with oral topotecan will allow worse performance status patients into the trial where we do well. So that's what's changed. Let me describe briefly for you what the trial is and how it is going to proceed. So it's a 3-arm trial. Arm A versus control is the primary analysis. Arm A is lurbinectedin at the same dose as we got approved, same regimen, everything the same. Arm B is a combination of a lurbinectedin and irinotecan, and the control arm is oral or IV topotecan or irinotecan. Why have we got the Arm B, and what does it mean in the stats plan? We have Arm B because we saw some very encouraging early data from this combination, both preclinically and clinically. And so we wanted to do this as basically 2 phase 3s in one. And interestingly, the data that gave us the idea to do this has now matured, and that cohort has grown to 100 patients and has been accepted for presentation at ASCO. And we will not disclose the data because it's embargoed, of course. However, what I can say is when one looks at this data and normalizes it for the exclusion in this trial for patients who progress within 30 days of frontline treatment, also known as chemotherapy-free interval 0 to 30, the data is very encouraging. This trial has got an overall survival primary endpoint and is accruing currently, and as I said, can serve to confirm in the US and be registrational with EMA and other jurisdictions.
So a couple of points there. First of all, when you're assessing the primary endpoint, because there's three arms basically, or as you said, kind of two studies in one, is there a hierarchical path in which you assess the primary endpoint?
Yes, the primary path is Arm A versus Arm C. However, Arm B will be looked at, and if it is successful after a small penalty, it will become a review issue with FDA. So there are four outcomes. Both A and B succeed. Both are fileable. It will depend on the data whether we do file both. There is a utility to doing that. The healthier, younger, fitter patient could get the combination, and the older, frailer would get the mono. It's possible Arm A succeeds, which is the primary endpoint, which would be fine, would proceed. It could be that Arm B only succeeds, and that is a review issue. And lastly, it could be that both fail, which is obviously not going to happen. Speculation, blue sky statement, all that.
And just in terms of like, some of the hypotheses that went into designing the study as far as the performance of the control group and how much better do you think you're going to be? Is there some assumptions that you've talked about how much better you're going to be?
Yeah, we have that in our slide. We try to be as transparent as possible. The trial is powered 90% to deliver a hazard ratio of Arm A versus C of 0.8. We've modeled the control arm to come in at 8 months, which would imply that 10 months would hit us the hazard ratio we seek.
Okay, so in terms of timelines for the study, then, kind of lay those out at least for where you stand today.
The study is enrolling and has been enrolling now for a couple of years. The enrollment in relapsed small cell clinical trials has become complex and competitive. There are other trials in the space, and there's not that many patients. If one looks at the clinicaltrials.gov, there are timelines there that you can follow. We don't give updates on our trials in progress in terms of where we're at. As I say this, though, however, we're no doubt going to go now to the first-line maintenance opportunity, which will precede the Lagoon readout and may render it to some extent moot, given that it's always better in cancer treatment to be upstream in an earlier indication than in the relapse setting where patients are sicker, are on fewer cycles, and so forth.
Okay, well, before we get to Enforte, maybe just talk about maybe a little deeper the data that's going to be presented at ASCO, and just kind of, again, lay out the design of what was evaluated there. And we'll get the numbers when we get them, but.
We presented originally 25 odd patients at World Lung 2020, which happened to be in 21 due to the pandemic. It was 25 patients. It showed about a 60% response rate, a PFS of around 6 months. And these patients are a bit different than Lagoon because they include the refractory patients. A refractory patient is someone who progresses during frontline therapy or within 30 days of it ending, the platinum ending. So there is an analysis there where we exclude those patients so people can make the comparison to what the Lagoon trial is going to read out. And that's the important group to look at. But it's all broken out in the study, which is now 100 patients, a bit over 100.
Okay, well, very good. We'll look forward to seeing that. Well, let's move on to your trial, Enforte. It's a phase 3 clinical trial using Lubi in combination with atezolizumab, and this is for first-line maintenance for small cell lung. So can you describe, you talked about some of the findings before, but can you describe more specifically the data from the two small study which evaluated this combo and how that informs the design of Enforte?
Too small is the study that I mentioned of 26 pure second-line patients presented at SITC 2021. And that data, if we want to go a little more detail than what I said, the first 5 patients were underdosed Lurbi as a safety run-in. When one looks at the overall 26, we had some complete responses, almost unheard of in relapsed small cell. And we had quite 50% partial responses. The objective response rate was 58% compared to our rate of 35% monotherapy and Atezo's of 5%. The disease control rate, meaning complete response, partial response, stable disease, is 85%, which is again greater than the sum of the two parts. The median PFS was immature at the time, so not really very useful to look at. This is the purest indication of what we should be thinking about when it comes to Enforte.
Okay, so can you describe the design of the Enforte trial?
Yeah, happy to. This is a clinical trial that gives patients the standard of care of platinum etoposide plus atezolizumab. After 4 cycles of platinum etoposide, it drops off, and the patients are randomized at that point to continue with atezolizumab, which is standard of care in the maintenance setting, or atezolizumab with the combination of lurbinectedin. This is a trial with co-primary endpoints of PFS and OS, and the trial sponsors of Jazz and Roche have said that they expect to have the PFS data, which may be fileable, depending on the data, around year end, plus or minus a period of time. So we're very excited about this trial. The reasons being, as I mentioned, as you move upstream, there are more patients because some are passing away through the whole time continuum. Some are denying treatment, saying I'm too banged up or I'm too old. And so there are more patients in the pool. Second of all, because they're healthier, they're likelier to get more cycles of drug than they are in second line because they're frailer. Thirdly, there will be marketing advantages for atezolizumab against durvalumab if they have this combination with lurbinectedin. And perhaps most importantly of all, whereas in the United States, this is going to be important for Jazz, who is marketing it, and we will be delighted to collect our royalty. In the European theater, with double the patients, maybe at half the price, say, we own 100% of the rights. So the opportunity for PharmaMar really is another game changer for us. This opportunity could be pretty close to our market cap.
Great. So if the data is positive, and you're able to file, get approval for first line, how
Uh-oh.
in about, I think, 16 countries, but really limited in Switzerland. So
Commercial strategy.
Yeah, you went a bit frozen, I guess. So we missed part of your question, but I guess you were asking about our commercial strategy.
yes.
Well, when approved, of course, I cannot talk about the commercial strategy in the US. That's just territory. But in Europe, of course, if we get a positive trial and eventually we get approval from the EMA, we'll have to start our price reimbursement in all countries in Europe. But it's important to highlight a couple of things that might help with this process. First, as you just mentioned, is the fact that we get approved in Switzerland. And Pascal just said one of the rules of thumb in terms of pricing, how to price of US. Well, we got better price than half of the price in the US, in Switzerland. That doesn't mean the price is going to be the same everywhere, but it's a good starting point. Second important thing here is that we had a compassionate use program in Europe in place for the last 3 years. And ever since, we've treated over 3,000 patients already in Europe, most of them in France, in an indication with a drug that is not approved in Europe, and we cannot do any commercial activity or any promotion or anything. So we've treated that amount of patients, because obviously the drug seems to work, and patients and doctors be very happy with it. And I think, or hopefully this should help in terms of market penetration once we eventually get the approval. And Pascal just mentioned about the market opportunity. So imagine just a figure. If you read out across data of Jaswa is been releasing in terms of sales, they've almost sold $1 billion since they started commercializing Zepzelca in the US in second line. It's about 970 million. So imagine that, bringing over to Europe and even more. These numbers are in second line. So imagine that, going to first line maintenance and eventually even get a label in second line. So the opportunity for us is important, and we're ready. We have our sales force ready and getting ready, and just waiting for data.
Okay, great. Well, that's another key event that we'll be looking forward to this year. Pascal, maybe we want to talk about a third opportunity for Lurbi, and that's the fact that it's being evaluated as part of a combination therapy as first-line treatment in patients with another disease, metastatic leiomyosarcoma. So can you describe, first of all, why the combo of Lurbi and doxorubicin could be effective in these patients?
So lurbinectedin is an analog of trabectedin, or Yondelis. Yondelis is approved in over 80 countries for soft tissue sarcoma in second or third line. It is also approved in ovarian cancer in combination with pegylated doxorubicin, pegylated liposomal doxorubicin, also known as Doxil. So it's been used quite often in this way. In many tumors, there have been quite a lot of investigator-sponsored trials. Indeed, at ESMO of last year, there was a French investigator-sponsored trial totaling 150 patients of doxorubicin plus Yondelis, trabectedin, in front line in soft tissue sarcoma. And this saw the PFS double, 12 months versus 6 months, compared to doxorubicin alone, and an OS of 33 months versus 24 months. Very strong statistics. So it's not a real big reach to assume that when trabectedin is working in this disease, that lurbinectedin may well work just as well, or if not better, because it's a more efficient drug. And so we're excited about this combination, especially because we know sarcoma like the back of our hand. We know the right centers, all the patient associations, which doctors to go to, and we think we can enroll the trial very well. It's not as big of an opportunity as small cell, relapsed small cell. However, although it's smaller, it should be noted the PFS, for example, in our trial in relapsed small cell is 4 months. And here the PFS is 12. PFS is a good proxy for duration of response. So it could be triple the response in fewer patients.
So Pascal, can you describe what the market opportunity here is?
So leiomyosarcoma is about 10 to 20% of soft tissue sarcoma. We estimate this to be about 2,000 US patients a year and about double that in Europe, 4,500. Of course, you have to work out what the price will be in each places, but that's roughly what it will be in both territories.
Okay. All right. And what if any are the timelines that you've talked about here?
This is an adaptive design trial, a phase 2/3. And so we're not giving any timelines, although I said previously we like to be transparent, because the phase 2B portion is basically 3 different arms. And we will pick one of the 2 experimental arms of Lodoxo-Lurbi versus the control Doxo. We'll pick one of the 2, and depending on the data, that will determine the sizing of the phase 3. And so we can't, without knowing the N, have any idea about the timing.
Okay, but I can imagine that and again, it's going to depend on the strength of the data, but the actual size of the phase 2, I'm imagining it's not that big of a study, or
Phase 2 is of the order of 40 to 50 patients per arm.
yeah. Okay, all right, very good. Well, maybe just ask a final couple of questions here. And Pepe, can you summarize your operating results in 2023, and any financial guidance you have provided for 2024?
Right. Yeah, 23, despite of the generics hitting Yondelis, made us lose more than 35 million. And increasing R&D, we increased our R&D to almost 100 million, which is almost 19%. So despite all that, we were still profitable. We had 2 million EBITDA and 160 million in revenues, of which well over 100 were generated by Zepzelca these days in terms of royalties, different types of milestone sales in Europe. That compassionate use program I've mentioned generated 30 million in Europe. We not giving guidance for 24, but more or less anyone could work out that if late stage trials continue be the same as we had in place last year, so the leiomyosarcoma and full year of Lagoon, so we can expect R&D to be in similar terms, a little bit up or down around what we had last year, those 99 million. Revenues carry on growing if we take into account the first quarter, where we show an increase in revenues, where we still were showing this profitability. We had first quarter 24 2 million net profit, and we were generating cash during the first quarter, about 9 million in operating cash flow. So altogether, seems like pretty much in line with last year, what we can expect 24. Improving some magnitudes over 23, and just waiting for the big jump in increase on sales when we get eventually the further approvals. And we've reduced debt in terms of cash. What we report in the first quarter is 164 million in cash, and with the lowest level of debt for the last 20 years or something, is about 36 million, which is straight banking debt, and a very little bond issue that we have remaining of about 16 million. So all in all, very solid position, increasing all revenues from Zepzelca, and having cash and balance sheet enough to cope with all these generics that we've mentioned from Yondelis.
Okay, great. Well, let me ask you both a final question, and that is, what do you think investors are underappreciating or missing most about the PharmaMar story? And Pepe, why don't you go first?
Well, one thing, I guess, is what it means, the approval of Enforte in first-line maintenance, and particularly from the PharmaMar perspective and in Europe. Ever since we started talking about this trial and jumping to first-line maintenance in small cell lung cancer, everybody was thinking from the US perspective. Jazz investors were thinking about what this could mean from Jazz or from treatment paradigm in the US and everything. But from PharmaMar perspective, we have to think about this is not only be approved in US, but also approved in Europe. So get brand new approval in Europe. So a complete new launch in Europe, where we have our own sales force. So instead of just having royalties, we're going to have direct sales. And we can more or less work it out, EBITDA margin or levels of, around 60%. So this could be very meaningful. Pascal just mentioned before, it could be an opportunity that'll be, I don't know, it could be in proportion of our market cap these days, or equal to our market cap these days, depending who's working out these or who's modeling these opportunity. So it's important. And a big part of this is going to come from Europe. So I guess might have gone, over the head of, a few people on the market. And another thing is, like, when talking about this same thing about a year ago, people said, oh yeah, this is going to be very important, very meaningful, but gosh, it's 2 years away. Well, now we're talking, according to our partners, Jazz or Roche, I mean, they expecting data for the end of this year, early next. So we're just a few months away. So it's not 2 years. But I guess these all together probably is one of the things that probably market is not paying much attention. I don't know, Pascal.
I mean, I take it even a bit further, and I look at the optionality of the Enforte readout at year end. Just the optionality of it. Just to put it into context here, right now Jazz is selling about 300 million a year, plus or minus. And anyone with a slide rule can work out our royalties start at 17%. We get $50 million. Okay. If this Enforte ends up being a doubling for just round numbers, we get another 50 million, maybe a bit more because we go through some breakpoints, right? But in Europe, remember I said double the patients, half the price. So if that's doubling from 3 to 6 in the States, that's 600 million to PharmaMar. So between the two, as Pepe just said, an opportunity of yearly sales in excess of our market cap. To me, it's inconceivable that the market can allow our stock to be where it is today, as we are right upon the opening of the envelope, because the upside is too huge. The optionality is out of proportion with the opportunity. It's almost implying that the trial is a stupid trial that has no data to support it, that was written by idiots, executed by idiots, and that's not the case in any of those premises. This is a trial that makes a lot of logical sense, that is supported by preclinical and clinical data, executed by 2 of the best companies in the world.
Yeah. And listen, again, until we have, eventually approval and new revenues, everything, we have the cash. So we don't have to dilute our shareholders while waiting for data or anything, or while investing in the rest of our pipeline, which of course have to look after for whenever we, get Lurbi in the market. We look back and say, well, what else do we have? So have that in late stage. So we have the cash to support that. And on top of that, we have the other opportunity, which is Lagoon. So we have not 1 trial, but 2 trials, as 2 chances to access the European market with Zepzelca.
Well, very good. Well, with that, we'll call it into this leadership call. I want to thank both of you so much for joining us today. For any listeners who would like to talk further with you, we can certainly facilitate that through our sales force. And we will have a replay of this call available either later today or tomorrow. So with that, thank you everybody for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.